So, NHS England are going to stop prescribing puberty blockers to young people who identify as trans.
Why did they in the first place? You could ask. The LGBT plus charities Stonewall said this. For some, an important part of this care comes in the form of puberty blockers, a reversible treatment that delays the onset of puberty, giving the young person extra time to evaluate their next steps.
So fewer than 100 young people in England are currently prescribed puberty blockers by the NHS, and they will be able to continue their treatment. Well, joining us in the studio now is Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, Miriam Cates. Miriam, your reaction to this news?
Well, I'm really pleased with this decision to stop prescribing puberty blockers on the NHS. I think it's part of the NHS's CAS review. Dr Hilary Cass, who's made a number of recommendations, so this is in response to a consultation. But the reason that this is really important is that, firstly, we don't know that puberty blockers are reversible.
Quite.
That's not true necessarily at all. And people think about puberty as the kind of visible changes that people go through, you know, girls developing breasts, starting period, boys having facial hair. But actually, it's all sorts of other physiological changes to the brain, to the bones, to growth that happen during puberty. You can't just pause biology in time. So this is an experimental treatment, and it's you know, fairly well agreed that medical ethics says you don't experiment on children.
I was just about to say, isn't that the point? How can you experiment on children as young as 11, 12, 13 and 14? It's terrible.
It is, exactly. And 98% of the children who are prescribed puberty blockers do go on to cross-sex hormones, which absolutely isn't reversible, and we know has serious and permanent damage to children for their, well, adults for the rest of their lives. I think the scandal here, though, is that we expect the NHS, we expect our healthcare system to be evidence-based. And, you know, when you go to the doctor for a treatment, you expect that whatever you're given has a strong evidence base behind it. And the scandal with the Tavistock clinic is that it was driven by ideology, this belief that a child who feels like they're born in the wrong body should therefore have that feeling accepted at face value and being put on this pathway to permanent change. And that's the scandal here, that medics were able to continue under that belief for so long.
Who do you credit with this victory?
Well, I think it's been a wide range of people coming together. We've had amazing whistleblowers who've written books about this, like Hannah Barnes. We've had people like Helen Joyce who've written books about the ideology. And then, of course, we've had Dr Hilary Cass, who's done this absolutely exceptional review and coined this phrase that it's not a neutral act to transition somebody, even if it's just socially transition somebody. So I think we've had the brakes kind of put on this over the last 2 years, and we've got to this point now where it's a very sensible position. But I would say that it isn't, although it's going to be illegal for the NHS to prescribe these drugs, they are available privately, online and in private clinics. And that has to be the next area to address.
There were some trans activists online last night advising children and saying, ignore this, find a private clinic.
Do you not sometimes feel you have to pinch yourself, Miriam, and think, how did the NHS, which is all about caring for people, allow this untested technology to be inflicted on very vulnerable young kids?
Yes, it's a really difficult question to answer, and I think how this untested ideology, this idea that there are more than two sexes or that you can change sex, has become so embedded in a practice that you would think is so based on evidence and research. That is a really difficult question to answer. But I think if we look around, it's not just the NHS that has become captured by some of these points of view. You know, we know the education system has, we know things like museums and even libraries have. And I think we've got some big questions to answer as a country about why these things weren't challenged when they first came into being. But I think we're heading in the right direction on this, but time will tell.
It's about a fundamental shift, isn't it, in our relationship with our bodies, which leads us on to this idea of assisted dying. If we decide that we want assisted dying in this country, it is one of the biggest social, emotional, human shifts that we will have seen in any of our lifetimes. Yeah. How do you feel about Keir Starmer saying that he would allow MPs to vote on this?
Well, I think it would be a huge mistake to go down that route. And actually, just a couple of weeks ago, the Health and Social Care Committee published their report into assisted dying, and they urged extreme caution on this issue and recommended that we invest in palliative care, that was the right place to put our efforts. And I completely agree with them, because I think although there are some very compelling individual cases, of course there are, of people who genuinely suffer at the end of life and and no one would feel anything but extreme sympathy for them. The change in our national psyche, as you said, by allowing this to happen would be huge. And if you look at any of the countries where assisted dying is allowed, it always starts by saying we're going to have all these safeguards, it's only for people who've got 6 months to live, etc. But in every single case, the criteria are expanded, you have more and more people able to do it. And if you just look at Oregon, for example, in the States, when it was first introduced there, I think just 13% of people said they felt a burden on their family. That was why they chose to die. It's now well over 50%.
Yeah.
And once you introduce this possibility, of course people feel pressure that they want to end their lives.
We were talking to Paul Richards, a Labour advisor, earlier. In Holland, they're already looking at it applying to children.
Yep, and in Belgium that's been the case for some time.
And when you think how many parents of children have gone to court, they're fighting the NHS because they want to turn the machine off, and now we want to turn the pendulum the other way completely.
Exactly, and I think, we in this country and in the West, we view individual human lives as deeply valuable. And that the value of a life doesn't depend on whether that life is wanted or not. We just value it. That's why we try to prevent suicide. Not because we don't understand that some people really don't want to be alive, but because we value every individual life. And once you make that shift, there's no going back.
We don't want to let you go without asking you about extremism. It's your question today at PMQs, isn't it? Just explain to us your concerns about this issue at the moment.
So clearly we have a big problem in this country with radical Islamism, and there is a grave threat from terrorism. We all know that. But my concern in trying to broaden the definition of extremism is that actually you'll catch all sorts of people with perfectly legitimate, maybe strange views, but perfectly legitimate views in a free society. And I think it's a mistake to separate extreme views and speech from actual violence and harm, and we should be targeting people who commit actual violence and harm rather than trying to create vague definitions that could catch, for example, gender-critical feminists like myself who say there's only two sexes. Is that an extreme view? Who knows? So I think we should stick...
There will be people who say that's exactly what you've got.
Exactly. So we should stick to people who actually intend violence and harm rather than criminalise. So
you're raising this in the Commons today?
I intend to, yes.
Right, could we get Michael Gove's definition proposed change tomorrow?
That's correct, yes. And I absolutely support the government's determination to tackle this. It's really important. And I think naming specific groups that potentially do support terror is the right way forward.
Yeah.
But what I'm concerned about is creating a broader legal definition of what is an extreme view. And I think that will in a free society, we should not be policing thought and speech.
Yeah, OK, right. Miriam, great to see you. Miriam Cates, MP.